I never expected my retirement dream to turn into a legal nightmare. All I wanted was peace, a few acres, a garden, and a place where my grandkids could visit and chase butterflies. But that dream shattered the day the bulldozers showed up. Let me rewind. My name is Amelia Hart. I'm 59, a retired nurse, and I inherited a slice of land in Willow Creek, about 4 acres of untouched beauty passed down from my late father. It was my escape, my future. 2 years ago, I moved into a modest, pre-built home I'd placed on the eastern edge of the property. Nothing fancy, just quiet. Just mine. First, the neighbors were friendly. Polite waves, small talk at the mailbox. But then came her. Vivian Crane, president of the HOA for the Oaks at Willow Creek, the luxury housing development that bordered my land. Hair always perfect, lips always pursed. She showed up with a binder in hand and superiority in her smile. "I just came to welcome you," she said sweetly, "and to make sure you're aware of our standards." I blinked. "I'm not part of the Oaks." Her smile tightened. "Oh, well, we like to keep the neighborhood uniform." I held back a laugh. "I'm on private land, Ms. Crane. I think I'll be just fine." That was the beginning. The warnings came next. Fake notices on my gate, complaints about my unapproved paint color, even though I wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. I ignored it. I figured she'd get bored. She didn't. Fast forward a few months, and I'd been traveling to visit my daughter for 2 weeks. When I came back, my jaw dropped. A massive concrete foundation had been poured on the western edge of my land. Framing had started. Construction trucks blocked the gravel road. And a large sign stood in front of it all. Future home of the Crane residence, a vision by Willow Creek Elite Properties. My stomach dropped. That land was mine. I stormed over to the site manager. "You're building on private property." He scratched his head and pulled out a permit. "We were told this was part of the Oaks." HOA president signed off. We even cleared it with zoning. My blood ran cold. "Vivian." I drove straight to the county records office the next morning. Spent hours poring over plats and property lines. And that's when I saw it. The documents had been altered. Someone had filed a revision with incorrect lot boundaries. The new lines put part of my land inside HOA control and gave Vivian legal clearance to build her dream home. But she didn't know one thing. I wasn't going to roll over. I was going to fight. And I had proof. I don't scare easily. But seeing my land chopped up on official records like it was a jigsaw puzzle, that chilled me to the bone. County clerk, a kind older gentleman named Mr. Renshaw, looked over the revised plat map I brought. He frowned. "This doesn't look right." "You think?" I said, half laughing to keep from screaming. "That's my land. My deed is ironclad. How did this get changed?" He scratched his chin. "Looks like a zoning request was pushed through 6 months ago. It went unchallenged." "Unchallenged because I didn't know it existed," I snapped. Renshaw leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You might want to get a property attorney. Someone forged this paperwork." The word forged hit me like ice water. I took his advice. Enter Marcy Tran, real estate attorney, sharp as a scalpel and just as quick. She reviewed my deed, the revised plats, and the building permits. Her verdict? "Your title is clean. But someone created a false annexation document and slipped it through zoning. This isn't just shady. It's criminal." I blinked. "Criminal like jail?" Marcy smiled. "If we play it right." She drafted a cease and desist letter that same day and filed an injunction to freeze construction. It wasn't immediate, but we served it within 72 hours. That's when Vivian showed up. She didn't knock. Just stood outside my gate with 2 HOA board members in matching navy polos, arms folded like they were starring in a bad courtroom drama. "You're overreacting," she said, voice syrupy. "We all benefit from progress." I opened the gate slowly. You forged legal documents and built a mansion on someone else's land. Vivian laughed. Oh, please. No one will believe that. You live in a trailer. It wasn't a trailer. It was a prefabricated modular home. But her tone made it clear. She thought she was better. She thought I couldn't win. I stepped closer. We'll let the court decide. Her mask cracked for just a second. You really want to drag this out, sweetheart? You'll lose more than just the land. You'll ruin your reputation. Your credit. You think lawyers are cheap? I stared at her, calm as stone. You think lies are? She stormed off with her board members in tow, but not before muttering under her breath, You'll regret this. I watched her drive off in her luxury SUV, mansion half-built on someone else's dirt. Marcy called me an hour later. The judge signed the freeze. No more building. They'll be served tomorrow. Finally, the game was on. But Vivian wasn't done. Because the next day, someone broke into my tool shed. The sun had barely risen when I walked out back and found the door to my tool shed swinging open. The lock was cut clean, not smashed but sliced with precision. Inside, every drawer had been yanked open, tools scattered like someone was looking for something. But they didn't take anything. Not my power drill. Not the chainsaw. Not even the copper piping. Just chaos. And a note. A single slip of paper, resting right on top of my overturned gardening tray. Back down. You're out of your depth. I froze. This wasn't just a land dispute anymore, it was a threat. I called the sheriff's department immediately. Deputies came out, took fingerprints, snapped photos, and logged it as criminal mischief. But I could tell they didn't expect much to come of it. No cameras. No witnesses. Just suspicion. But I had more than suspicion. I had motive. I had paperwork. And I had Vivian's signature on a permit she never should have signed. That same morning, Marcy filed an additional motion, intent to pursue criminal charges for fraudulent property annexation and intimidation. Vivian's little empire is cracking, she told me. She's in violation of state law, county zoning, and HOA ethical codes, assuming she hasn't rewritten those too. I was still shaken. My land, my space, had been invaded. But part of me felt something else too. Fuel. Every scare tactic Vivian used proved one thing: she knew she was losing. And by Friday, that became obvious to everyone. Because a court officer showed up on Vivian's build site with a stop work order, posted right on the steel framing of her dream mansion. I happened to be out watering my flowers when she drove up. She slammed her brakes and stormed out of her car in heels and a silk blazer. She yanked the notice off the post and spun toward me. You think you've won, she hissed. This is just temporary. I set my watering can down and met her glare. Funny. That's what they say about lies. You'll never make it stick, she snapped. You can't prove I changed those documents. Marcy, who had just arrived from her office, stepped out of her car and said coolly, Actually, we can. Vivian's face drained of color. Because we had just received metadata logs from the county's public filing system, showing the exact computer, login, and timestamp used to submit the altered property map. And guess whose HOA office computer had done it? That's right. Vivian's. This is far from over, Vivian whispered, shaking. Marcy smiled. You're right. Next stop, court. Vivian turned and stormed off, heels clicking like a warning shot. But deep down, she knew. Her foundation was cracked, and I was about to bring the whole house down. Court date was locked, June 14th, 9 a.m. And for the first time in weeks, I finally felt like I could breathe again. But that didn't mean Vivian was done. If anything, she doubled down. The next few days were a circus. She filed a counterclaim accusing me of harassment, defamation, and, get this, trespassing on my own land. She even had the audacity to list the tool shed break-in as fabricated to create false sympathy. Her lawyers requested a motion to dismiss my claim entirely. But Marcy was ready. She filed a formal response backed with every document we had: the original deed, satellite maps from before construction began, the forged plat files, and most damning of all, the county clerk's metadata proving that the document revisions were submitted from a computer registered under the HOA office IP. That was our silver bullet. But court isn't just about being right. It's about proving it, calmly, cleanly, and with ironclad facts. And Vivian? She was unraveling. She held a special HOA meeting 2 days before the hearing. Tried to rally her board behind her. But word had spread fast. Neighbors were whispering. People were uncomfortable. A few even contacted me privately. One message stuck with me. We didn't know how far she'd gone. "You're doing the right thing, Amelia." Gave me the strength to keep pushing. The day before court, Marcy came by with a final briefing folder, a step-by-step outline of how we'd present our case. "Vivian's going to come in confident," she warned. "People like her always do. But we have the truth. Don't let her rattling shake you." I nodded. "I've stared down hospital emergencies. I can handle a rich woman with a clipboard." We laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. That night, I walked the border of my property under the stars, past the half-finished mansion with its silent skeleton of beams and concrete. There were no workers anymore. No lights. Just an eerie quiet. That was when I realized something. Vivian built this house on the wrong land because she thought no one would stop her. She thought I was weak. That I'd stay silent. That I'd be too old, too tired, too small to fight. But I wasn't. I was standing on the soil my father once walked. The land he worked. The land he gave to me. This wasn't just property. It was my legacy. And tomorrow, I was taking it back. When I returned to the house, there was a car idling near my driveway. A dark SUV with tinted windows. It didn't move. Didn't honk. Just sat there. I stood my ground. Eventually, it pulled away. But in that moment, I realized, win or lose in court, Vivian was going to make this personal. And that made me more dangerous than she could ever imagine. Courtrooms have a strange energy, part theater, part war zone. I arrived early, dressed simply but sharp. Marcy stood beside me in her tailored navy suit, calm and confident. We didn't need flash. We had facts. Vivian, on the other hand, made an entrance. She swept into the room like she owned it. Heels clicking, silk scarf tied perfectly, 2 lawyers trailing her like loyal puppies. She glanced at me with a smirk, then turned away as if I were beneath her notice. But her confidence? It was about to collapse. Judge Monroe, a tall, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, took the bench. Kind of judge who could read truth just by how your voice cracked. I liked her instantly. The first 30 minutes were Vivian's team laying out their case, how the HOA had full authority to modify zoning lines, how I had neglected to maintain my property, and how her client had acted under the belief that she had legal ownership. I could barely keep from scoffing. Then it was our turn. Marcy stood tall and began with a simple sentence. "Your Honor, the defendant didn't act under mistaken belief. She forged documents, manipulated zoning records, and began construction on land she never legally owned, and we can prove it. And then she did." She laid out a timeline, deed history, pre-construction land surveys, aerial photos, and most importantly, the metadata logs from the county's digital archive. We had proof that the fraudulent document revisions came from the HOA office computer, logged in under the assistant director's credentials. The same assistant who had since quit and, when interviewed, stated under oath that Vivian told me to just sign and submit it. That courtroom went silent. Vivian's face drained of color. Her smirk vanished. Then Marcy handed Judge Monroe one final piece, a notarized statement from the county clerk himself, confirming that no approval for boundary change had been granted, and if it had been, it would have required my signature. Which, of course, had never happened. Judge Monroe looked directly at Vivian. "Miss Crane, do you have any evidence supporting your claim to this land?" Vivian fumbled through her lawyer's folder. Her hands shook. She opened her mouth and said nothing. The silence in that courtroom was thunderous. Judge Monroe nodded slowly. "We'll recess briefly. I'll deliver my decision afterward." Outside in the hallway, Vivian brushed past me like I didn't exist. But I caught the look in her eyes, not anger. Not even embarrassment. Panic. She knew what was coming. And she was right. Because when the judge returned 20 minutes later, she didn't just rule in my favor. She set fire to every lie Vivian had built her mansion on. When Judge Monroe returned to the bench, the air in that courtroom was thick, not with tension but with inevitability. Vivian sat stiffly, face drained of its usual haughty glow. Her lawyers whispered something to her, but she didn't blink. She knew. The judge's voice was calm, clear, and brutal in its precision. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Amelia Hart. The defendant, Vivian Crane, acted with deliberate intent to falsify legal property boundaries. The structure erected on the plaintiff's land is deemed unlawful and shall be subject to removal at the expense of the defendant." Vivian gasped audibly. Judge Monroe didn't stop there. Furthermore, the court is referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential charges of document fraud, property encroachment, and malicious intent to defraud. A separate civil penalty will also be considered, pending valuation of damages to the plaintiff's land. Vivian's lawyer stood up, stumbling over his words. "Your Honor, surely we can appeal." "You may," Judge Monroe said coldly. "But it won't change what's been proven here." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just exhaled, the kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding for months. Outside the courtroom, reporters had already caught wind of the case. Apparently, word had leaked from the HOA board, and the headline practically wrote itself. HOA president loses mansion after land grab backfires in court. The community turned fast. By the next day, neighbors who once feared or followed Vivian were speaking openly, stories of her threats, secret meetings, and fines that mysteriously vanished once questioned. The HOA board held an emergency vote. Vivian was removed as president by unanimous decision. I heard from one member that she tried to scream her way through the meeting, accused everyone of betrayal. But no one backed her this time. Marcy, ever efficient, helped file a lien against Vivian's assets to cover the court-ordered removal of the half-built mansion. Demolition companies arrived the following week. I didn't watch, but I listened. The groan of concrete splitting. Clatter of beams falling. The echoes of ego collapsing in real time. And you know what? It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like restoration. I planted sunflowers where her front porch was supposed to be. I fixed my fence. And for the first time in over a year, I stood on my land and didn't feel like a guest. One evening, I received a letter. From Vivian. It was brief. "You ruined everything. I hope you're proud." I folded the paper slowly, set it in a drawer, and whispered, "I didn't ruin anything. You just couldn't steal it." But even with the mansion gone, her shadow still lingered. Because one final court date remained. Vivian Crane was going on trial. 6 months later, I was back in the same courtroom. But this time, it wasn't a civil hearing. It was criminal. Vivian Crane, once the unshakable queen of the HOA, now stood as the defendant in a trial that would decide whether her fraud went beyond greed into the realm of the law. Courtroom was packed. Former HOA members, neighbors, even a few journalists. Everyone wanted to see how far the mighty had fallen. Vivian had hired a new lawyer, a flashy, fast-talking man in a gray pinstripe suit who walked like he'd already won. He argued that Vivian was misled by staff, that the annexation was a bureaucratic error, and that I was making a vindictive power play to humiliate a respected community leader. But the evidence told a different story. County records. Login metadata. The assistant's sworn statement. Even a voice recording, quietly captured by a former HOA treasurer, of Vivian saying, "She doesn't know what she owns. And what she doesn't know won't hurt her." That line hit the jury hard. Her arrogance had finally turned into evidence. Over the next 3 days, the prosecution dismantled her defense, one lie at a time. The judge, the same one from my civil case, watched with a stony expression. On the final day, I was called to the stand. I kept my answers short, clear, honest. "I didn't ask for this fight," I told the courtroom. But I also didn't back down. Because if people like her get away with things like this just because they have money or power, then what's the point of owning anything at all? Vivian didn't look at me once. Not during my testimony. Not during closing arguments. Not even when the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 14 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent mark on her record, a conviction for property fraud. Was it enough? Some said no. But for me, it was perfect. 'Cause it wasn't just about punishment. It was about proof. Proof that power doesn't make you untouchable. That land can be stolen on paper, but not when someone's willing to fight for it. That truth, no matter how quietly it begins, always finds a way to be heard. I returned home that evening to find a small package on my porch. No note. Just a tiny sunflower in a ceramic pot. I smiled. Later that week, I filed to donate half the disputed land, the part where her mansion once stood, to the County Garden Society. They turned it into a public green space. Place for kids, laughter, and peace. The land was finally free. So was I.